Welcome. Here we are with Breath to Breath, and I have the honor of introducing Josh Duntz. Josh, thank you for being here.
Yeah, super happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Well, let's dive right in. Josh has a 10-year career as a Navy Special Operations veteran and was a Navy EOD tech, which stands for Explosive Ordnance Disposal. He's a breathing coach, a human performance specialist, and last but not least, he is co-founder and CEO of Stasis, which is how I got to know Josh. I am a speech pathologist, and when I was talking with other colleagues in my area about breathing and stasis came up when long COVID came up. And literally, this was the only option that I and either any of my colleagues even knew of additional support for patients with COVID. So I literally just emailed Josh earlier this year. I was like, hey, I want to meet you, talk to you. That's how we started our communications and connections. And I now actually work with Josh and Stasis as one of their respiratory trainers. So I've gotten to really see the benefit and beauty of it. But Stasis, could you just maybe describe it briefly to people that aren't familiar with it? What is Stasis?
Yeah. So still kind of like working on how we describe it, right? I feel
Yeah.
like it's evolving and it's evolved a lot since its inception for sure. And we can kind of get into like how it all got started.
Yeah.
But basically I like to describe it as what we're about to launch is like a brand new platform. And it's kind of like a digital health platform focused on respiratory training, right? So basically it gives mostly COVID patients is kind of like our target market right now, but a 12-week breathing rehab program that prescribes kind of like 10-minute breathing exercises every day. And then the patients have the ability to kind of track some of their symptoms and progress, both like from some quantitative measurements as well as like qualitative measurements. And then on the back end to that, now we've added like a portal for providers as well too, so they can kind of track their patients' progress and be more involved with kind of that journey from initial consultation all the way to like, a patient kind of ending their 12-week program and seeing the progress that they've made. So it's constantly evolving, but kind of like a digital health platform is what I would describe it as now.
Well, I asked you that on purpose because I have one down, but I was curious how you would describe it. But at least the interactions that I had initially and then now working with it, to me, it's the only thing that essentially is like, this is broken down step by step by step. Literally, like if you need a day-to-day regimen, if you need, to me, it's your prescription. It's the prescription
Right.
of how you start to get better on a daily basis. And I think you'll do a really great job at that.
Thanks.
But also, you don't just create stasis out of the blue. So we're going to go back a little bit. I always like to ask all of my guests, what is your breath of origin story? And what I mean by that is kind of taking a play off of what is your family of origin? What is your breath of origin? How did you even get here? And you can make this as long or as short, detailed, or brief as you like, but what brought you to the breath?
Yeah. So this my kind of introduction to breath work started or happened when I was still active duty in the military. So back in this was probably like 2018. Still on active duty. I was actually like on my way out of the military. I was in the last couple of years of my contract. Um, and one of the colleagues, one of the guys that I worked with was preparing for this kind of like big physical test that he was going to do to screen for like the special unit that he was trying out for. And I was just kind of like his training buddy at the time. So we would work out together, go on runs together, stuff like that. And he was following this breathing program by Brian MacKenzie is the guy who made it. He's done a bunch of stuff in the breathwork space. I forget the name of the company that it was back then. Now his company is called Shift. And they kind of do a lot around like stress management and stuff like that. He works with Emily Hightower and then Rob Wilson. They created this like art of breath seminar that they did at the time and stuff like that, really geared towards performance based and like athletes. Brian MacKenzie has a kind of long history with like CrossFit endurance, and he's an endurance athlete himself. So my buddy kind of introduced me to this stuff. He was using breath work as like a means to warm up before we'd go on runs. And then Brian and his team created this system, which they call like the gears basically. And so it's kind of like, you think of it as a car, like gear 1 through gear 5, right? Is different ways that you would breathe. So gear 1, really like low intensity exercise, right? Like a jog or walking. It's just kind of just a slow, smooth nasal in, nasal out breathing pattern. And then gear 5 would be like all out sprint, basically like hyperventilation, right? Like in and out through the mouth. And then the subsequent gears kind of like, goes from, breathing in through the nose, out through the mouth, and kind of like goes up in gears as you get more high intense exercise. So I was kind of like, at the time, this stuff was all new to me. I wasn't even like, at that time, I wasn't very into, I would say I've grown a lot as a person over the past few years, like, and breathwork has been a huge part of that, both, spiritually, mentally, like performance, all this stuff. And so this was kind of the inception of all that for me. So at the time, I wasn't into like yoga or meditation or any of that stuff. So a lot of these things were kind of very foreign to me. Some of it seemed a little like esoteric to me, which I wasn't very into. But this is a guy who like I really trusted, and he was like a stud, like physically and stuff. So I like kind of looked up to him in that sense. So I was like, all right, well, if he's like willing to do this and he's seen benefits from it, I'm willing to try it out myself too. And so I would do a lot of the stuff with him. And after we would work out, we would like go sit in the sauna and kind of do like some more like deep breathing, like slow relaxation type stuff. And now I know, like, we were kind of like warm up, activating more the sympathetic nervous system, getting our lungs kind of up and ready to perform. And then after the workouts, kind of, relaxing, more parasympathetic type stuff. And so that was kind of the origins of that for me. At the same time, I was introduced to Wim Hof breathing and like the cold tub stuff and sauna work. So I was kind of like really just diving into like all these more holistic avenues around human performance at the time. And it's kind of weird looking back on it now, because it was like such perfect timing for me, because at the time I was just leaving the military, kind of like when I was really getting all into this. And that was like a very challenging time and transition part of my life. I was also going through some hard personal stuff at the time. So it's kind of like just completely shedding this identity that I had, like I joined the military right out of high school. So it was kind of all I had known as like an adult or like my professional life. And then, you have this like deep brotherhood and community aspect that you have. And like, I saw a lot of those guys today or still today are like my best friends. And then when you leave the military, you go from working with these people 24 hours a day, every day of the week for a decade. And then the day you leave the military, it's like, that's it. It's like, sometimes you don't ever see any of those people again, but it's just like completely changed for me. So at that time, that's kind of like when I was first starting to build Stasis. And that's when like breathwork kind of became like a part of my routine, more for like less so performance based, more so like kind of healing, like, getting rid of trauma and like PTSD, stress, anxiety, depression, all those things. And so that was kind of, I guess that's the origin story of how I got into breathwork. And, my relationship with it is always evolving and has changed a lot and grown a lot deeper over the past couple of years with some other stuff that I've gotten into as well. So yeah, it's been kind of like a crazy journey, but that was the origins of it.
Oh no, I love it. And I always take a ton of notes. And what I just think is so fascinating is layers. It's all these layers. And I talk a lot about with clients and and different folks when I talk about the importance of breath work. It's basically you've got a hierarchy of health, and that very foundational level, the very first one, is your breath and respiration. And if that's not there, then everything else suffers as a result.
Mhm.
And I love the analogy of the gears. And what I was just thinking is like there's different breath work practices and exercises specifically for the physiological response, but also if we're going on like this gear and bike riding metaphor, it's essentially what are you doing it for? Performance, anxiety, depression, just learning how to be in your skin, transitioning. There's like all the different settings. Like, are we going cross country? Are we going in the city?
Mhm.
Are we going like for a leisurely ride? And it can go with you and grow with you in any capacity you want it to. And what I love also is I wanted to interject so many times and be like, welcome to the rabbit hole. And because it leads to so many other things. And I love that you didn't understand it, but you were willing to try it. And I think that's what we get to do. Anyone that is in the breathing space is you get to model what health looks like in a different form. It's not a pill. It's not like an injection. It is something from the inside out versus the outside in. And the thing that is constant is us with change and challenge. We are that common
Mhm.
thread. And it might be that you're transitioning from the military to civilian life. It may be that you're transitioning from childhood to adulthood. It may be that you're going through a challenging relationship. I mean, it honestly is anything and everything, but the breath, yourself, that's what you have. And so I met you through a long COVID connection, but honestly, this is for anyone. And I just think it's really cool that you've been able to put all those pieces together. And what I think is also incredible is you are now modeling for your other brothers in service what health can be. And you mentioned
Mhm.
shift. I told you before I started recording, I started doing some research. I was like, oh man, Josh has done some things, but you used to work with shift, didn't you?
So it was a different shift
A
that
different
I
shift.
worked for. Yeah. When I got out of the military, I got a job like in tech, and it was a company called Shift. It was actually the CEOs of former EOD guy too that I worked with in the military. But basically they like help veterans get jobs in the tech industry. So same name, different company though.
I was gonna say, I'm going to impress Josh with my knowledge. I was close. All right. Well, then I do have a specific question. The explosive ordnance disposal, were you doing any breathing during then, or did they like even prepare you with any of these type tools to help you through? And I had to look that up. EOD essentially is where you go and check explosive devices to make sure that the passageway is safe for the rest of your unit. Is that correct?
Yeah, so EOD, it's basically the military's version of like the bomb squad, right? So their
Yeah.
EOD techs are responsible for like any explosive hazard. So um, it can mean a lot of different things. There's a lot of different types of teams that you could be like attached to, and that kind of dictates what the day-to-day like mission sets would be. But yeah, ideal, like, especially in Iraq and Afghanistan, EOD techs were responsible with mainly like disarming or getting rid of IEDs, whether that be like on roadsides or kind of like in villages. Again, depends on like what type of team you're attached to. As far as like no, so the short answer is kind of no, they don't really give you a lot of these techniques.
Missed
Yeah, I know.
opportunity. Yeah.
So that was like something that, a lot of the guys in my community, like once we started like experimenting with this stuff, realized how powerful it could be. And when I first started Stasis, that's actually what we were trying to do, was we were building programs specifically for like military operators, because we understand how powerful these tools could be in real time, especially downrange, because a lot of the stuff that EOD techs are doing, it's like you go from this really like high stress environment where you're in this high sympathetic fight or flight state, and then you have to like be able to calm yourself down to like look at this bomb, and like it's like an intricate problem that you have to kind of figure out how it works and how am I going to disarm this. So you have to kind of like really calm yourself down really fast. And that's like what war is anyways. In general, it's like a lot of like ups and downs, like there could be a couple minutes where it's super intense, and then it's like things calm down and you have to be able to communicate and make decisions. And so like we know now that, you know, your nervous system, like you can't really do a lot of really good analytical thinking or decision making if you're in that fight or flight mode. Or, you know, like intricate motor skills and stuff aren't very good in that high, you know, sympathetic state either. So we were trying to like work with military operators to teach them these things, because it's just like the best tool that they have at their disposal in real time. You know, obviously like ice baths and sauna and all that stuff is great, but you can't do that in real time. All you really have is your breath, right? So it's like that was like the original idea around stasis before we got into the healthcare space, was like, and something I'm still like passionate about and eventually we'll try to do. It just, how the timing and stuff worked out with the pandemic and like the opportunities that were there. It was just like, and it's really hard to work with the military. So you have to go through a lot of like hoops and hurdles, but one day we'll get there. But yeah, that was kind of the idea.
Well, when I was reading about you and the information that you provided and what I found, I was like, surely they did breathing then, because that to me would be the most ideal. They'll get there.
Yeah.
Or they won't, but you figured it out. And now you can, like I said earlier, you can model it for others. I think that's pretty huge. And I like also that, you know, you weren't necessarily preparing for long COVID, because no one knew what this was coming. Really, my introduction into breath was really James Nestor's book, Breath. And that's when it was really come together. And for me, it was the combination of taking what I knew from speech pathology, myofunctional therapy, and then just I'd been a yoga participant and then becoming a teacher. And to me, it's when you start to see all the overlapping patterns from different domains. And I feel like you've done a good job of that too, because that's life. Life isn't just like one black and white, either or. It is both and, it is gray, it is all of it. And the breath absolutely is that common thread that goes through all of it. All right, so tell me a little bit, if you're okay shifting gears, what is your daily breathwork practice like now? And I know it can change and it can vary. This can be like your favorite ones that you do, that you pull out in your back pocket, that you always like are aware of. But how are you integrating breath into your everyday life?
Yeah. So typically first I'll do a form of like meditation and breath work first thing when I wake up in the morning. So I typically get up like around 6:30 every morning. And that's kind of like, I'll literally jump out of bed and immediately, depending on where I am, I have like a little meditation spot at home that I'll go to immediately outside. So I'll sit down, I'll do just like a couple of minutes of, you know, just kind of like deep diaphragmatic breathing. I don't have any specific like cadence or anything that I go through. It's just kind of like whatever feels good to my body at the time. And then I'll go into like a standard meditation practice. Obviously, most meditation practices are anchored around the breath anyways. So I would, you know, it's kind of depending on who you ask or what you look at, like breath work and meditation can almost be kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
And then, so that'll be kind of first thing in the morning. That's typically like just pretty short, 10 or 15 minutes, sometimes longer, sometimes shorter, depending on what I have going on that day. And then I typically go right into some sort of, I'm either going to go on a run or going to the gym and working out. And then I'll do a lot of like breath work as part of my warm up to just increase elasticity in my lungs, try to create more space in my lungs for more oxygen. So that's normally like involved more of like, I'll use kind of like those gear systems. I'll either be like on a bike, or on a treadmill or something, some sort of like cardiovascular, where I'll kind of like intentionally slowly ramp up my breathing faster and faster and faster. And I'll kind of go up that gear ladder. And then I'll do some sort of like yoga stretches, like cat cows or like tail wags or something like that. And I'll involve some like breath holds typically with that.
Yeah.
Sometimes if I'm going on like longer endurance training runs, I'll use like a version of Patrick McCown's like high altitude simulation training from Oxygen Advantage, where I'll just do like a certain amount of steps. Basically, you can do it a lot of different ways where I'm holding my breath. So I'll try to do it with a pulse oximeter a lot, because you want to get your SpO2 below 85% to really get the benefits. And basically your spleen releases a lot of like red blood cells. So it just increases the amount of oxygen saturation that's in your blood. So really good for like any type of like endurance sports or something like that, where it's cardiovascular based. So I'll do that. I'll go on my training run, and then typically like immediately after my runs or workouts, I'll just do some sort of like 5 minutes, kind of just like down regulating, try to like kickstart that recovery process. And then it's more like sporadic throughout the day, like if I'm feeling really stressed out at work or whatever, like I'll kind of just like, take some deep breaths for a couple minutes before I'm like switching tasks or going into a meeting or something like that.
You mean when, not if. We all stressed out at work.
Yeah.
Like, cause that's supposed to happen. No, I hope I didn't cut you off.
No, that was good. Yeah, I'm all good.
That's a pretty robust regimen. I find that I go through like highs and lows of like being really, really adamant and like have a really good routine, and then other seasons I don't. But it's always just finding that one thing that works for you. And I know that when you do it every single day, this is the linchpin. So that's what I like also about Stasis, is you give like daily and also multiple times during the day. And what I see as overlap of what you're doing with that and kind of what you just said with your routine is the carryover. It's all about how do you start to let this bleed over into your life a week from now, but not also like time, but it could be a week from now, a month from now, a year from now, but also not just at your desk, but like out when you're talking to neighbors, or when you have a meeting with your boss, or when you're with your children, or when you find yourself at midnight and you can't go back to sleep, or realistically like 3 o'clock. But it's how do you start to let these things bleed in, and it's when you practice them every single day with consistency. That's the muscle memory, that's the plasticity, that's how you start to create these new neural pathways so that your body doesn't have to work so hard to remember it. It's just what you do. And the heart rate variability, which I had written down when you were talking about like the armies, like this, that's also life, this. And what I think is also interesting is, I remember telling one of the therapists that I was seeing at the time, I was like, I feel like I'm high, then I'm low, and I'm high. She's like, Karen, that's your heartbeat. Because if you're flat, dead, you're supposed to go up and down, but we just don't want to get stuck up here and down there. All right, just a couple more questions if you're still feeling good.
Yeah.
Okay, so for me, I think it's really cool when you are starting to make significant changes. And I've mentioned it modeling before. I'm just curious, like some of the people that you spent those 10 years with, do you feel like they've noticed a change in you and like in your ability to transition from that military life to civilian life? And have they asked you like, hey, what are you doing? How did you do this? And it could even be them or your family, because I think that's when you make the biggest impact, is like the people that are closest around you. When they start to notice a change in your behavior and your outlook and your temperament, that's when I think you start to drop these really, really meaningful seeds that sprout into an opportunity to share something different that they might have been closed off to before. So, long-winded question. How do you feel like what you've gone through, your transition, has permeated maybe into some of your friendships and your family members noticing and maybe asking you for support and doing the same?
Yeah, 100% for sure. The people that are closest to me, I think if you were to ask them like the Josh that you know today, vice the Josh that you knew like 3 or 4 years ago, they would be like, oh my God, it's a completely different person. It's not because of, breath work per se, but it's a lot of different modalities and things. But that's life, right? It's like, it's never one thing either. But yeah, it's been cool to see, especially like some of my like family members and stuff that are definitely not open to this type of stuff, like, ask questions and just like, want to talk about it, right? And so that just like opens up at least a small lens where, I can start to talk to them and see. I've seen, a lot of my close friends, people in the military that were definitely like not open to a lot of this stuff are more open to it, asking questions, stuff like that. And then really, I think the biggest impact is just like the people that we've been able to affect through Stasis throughout the past couple of years, talking about like, thousands of people from all over the world. And a lot of them were probably people that would never have been open to this type of stuff, but because of how, bad they were and, how debilitated they were
Yeah.
from COVID. And like, this almost became kind of like a last option for a lot of people, probably. And then, I still get emails every week from people like just telling me how much of a difference this has made, and how great they were to find stasis and breathing, and how like, or like stories about like, oh my God, I used this program when I was recovering from COVID, and now I taught my 4-year-old son how to breathe and like calm down from temper tantrums or stuff like that. Just like all these crazy stories that are so cool. So it's like, that's the stuff that I think has really had a huge impact, more so than maybe just like my close circle of family and friends, is like the broader scale, like all these people around the world that were brought to breath work and stasis, unfortunately, because of bad circumstances. But I'm a believer that like through resistance and through the dark times, like there, you can't see the light, right? If you don't go through the dark. So at the end of the tunnel here, like I think like we made a huge impact on a lot of people's lives, and that those people and the effect that they will have on their family and friends, like it's just like kind of that network effect where more and more people are getting introduced to it. So that's the exciting thing for me.
No, I love all that. I mean, 'cause essentially it's not, you're not only impacting one person, you're impacting that person and then all the people around them. And then if one person shares it with another person, just like you said, that client that was using it with their son, I mean, this is for everyone.
Mhm.
This is how you start to make people healthier, happier, more resilient, more open. And also, we're such creatures of habit. If things are not awful, why would we change? Like they either so good or so bad for us even to like consider making a shift or change or pivot. And I mean, I've been down here, I've also been up here, but when it's in the middle, it's just really hard to even consider making any changes. So if this is where you find them, that's where you find them. And when you get sick and tired of being sick and tired, normally that's when you're open to shifting
Mhm.
and changing. How long did it take you to build Stasis? I mean, like when did you start to now? Like how long are we talking about?
Um, so we started doing the breathwork stuff with COVID patients in like, I believe June of 2020.
Mm,
Um, and before that, I like started the company in October of 2019. Originally, like stasis wasn't even anything to do with breath work. It was like we were trying to build like a commercial like smart cold tub that like breathing was going to be a part of it, but
uh-huh.
um yeah, and then we kind of shifted to just focus on breath work. And then that's when we started making kind of like these stress management programs for military people and stuff. And we did that for a couple months. And then right when the pandemic started, I had already been working with Dr. David Putrino from Mount Sinai at that time, because his background is in like human performance too. So before the pandemic, he did a lot of work with like Red Bull and some Red Bull athletes and stuff. So that's how we originally got introduced to each other, was more through the human performance world. And then his human performance lab in New York at Mount Sinai got turned into like a long COVID recovery clinic. And
Mm,
so he basically, we started, early on in the pandemic, they started recognizing these symptoms. A lot of them were respiratory, breathlessness, like brain fog, all this stuff. And so, kind of through conversations with him, he's like, hey, I know you're doing all this breathwork stuff like with athletes and military people. I have a lot of patients that are having breathing issues. Can you start to like work with some of them and see if some of the same techniques and stuff would help them too? Um, And so I think he gave me like 5 patients that I worked with, like one-on-one for a couple of weeks, and was just kind of like really testing some stuff out because I didn't know what their capabilities were. I didn't want to make any of their symptoms worse. So it was kind of like figuring out what was the right like prescription, right, of like type of breath work and stuff. Um, and after that 2 weeks, like I think they all, if not close to all, like just basically through word of mouth was like, I feel a lot better. Like, I feel like this is really helping. So after that point, we kind of made it more of a traditional like pilot case study at Mount Sinai, where they started referring a lot of patients to us. That continued to go well for a couple months. And then that's when we were starting to develop that 12-week program that we have now. And just like constantly iterating it based off of feedback and some of the data that we were finding and stuff too. And then it kind of just organically grew into what it was now, like word of mouth. Dr. Putrino started talking a lot about Stasis on some of the podcasts and stuff. So we had like a lot of other clinics that were hitting us up. And then, yeah, it kind of just like grew to what it is today, like that.
Well, I love the organic growth. I don't have an answer for this. I just am going to ask and see what you say. But one of the clients that I actually was working with, she said she had like waited 6 months to get to this long COVID clinic. It wasn't Mount Sinai, it was another one. And when she was telling the doctor her symptoms like brain fog and just sluggishness, all he had was to prescribe Ritalin. And that made me so angry on so many different levels. And also to me, it's such a disservice and misunderstanding of what actually is going on. So why is it, do you think people, or not people, doctors, practitioners, well, I guess people, we're all people. Why do you think there's such, I don't know, maybe resistance against trying something so fundamental as breathing? Is it a society mindset, medication, prescription, heavy culture?
Yeah. I think it's a combination of a lot of those things. I think a large factor has to do with just the lack of education that most of these providers have around breathing. So that was something that we were like looking into and really interested in that question ourselves and early on, because, like my team and I, like, we didn't have a traditional background in like healthcare. We're not doctors and stuff. So we kind of like have all just like did a lot of research and read a lot of like studies and read a lot of books around breathing and stuff, and became kind of like, self-taught experts in the matter. But early on, when we started doing all this, like, and still today, it's crazy to me that like I'm having all these conversations with like doctors and like respiratory therapists and stuff, and like they're coming to me as the subject matter expert, right? And I'm like, you're the doc, like, so. And then through conversations with them, like they tell, hey, like we maybe had like an hour of training throughout my entire medical school on this. And so one, right, just a lack of education from the standard industry or whatever like that, the medical school and stuff just doesn't pay a lot of attention to this. Two, it's just the way that, the US economy, capitalism works, right? Like a lot of these doctors are taught, probably majority in medical school, is okay, these are the symptoms, and then here's what you prescribe for those symptoms. We have a very like symptom-based medical, society, basically, where it's like, how do we treat the symptoms instead of digging a little deeper and trying to figure out, well, what's causing these symptoms, and can we look at this person as a whole system, right? The whole body instead of symptoms, right? So that's another problem. Two, it's like with the pandemic, it's time, right? A lot of these doctors, like, they're seeing so many patients a day, they'd only have 10 or 15 minutes with someone. So they don't have the time to really do a deep dive and like try to figure out what that root cause is. A lot of this stuff, it's like, tell me what's wrong with you. Okay, I'm just going to try to fix those symptoms because that's what, you care about in the moment. So there's a lot of issues with it. The cool part to me that I've seen with this is like a lot of doctors and providers are open to this now. And I think it's one cause because it's like they ran out of options and nothing was working, right? So they're like,
They
all right,
did.
we'll give this a shot.
Yeah.
And then I think it's too like, I
Yeah.
think the actual like patients and the humans have a big part of that too, where they were like, you know, hearing about this from their friends or on like a lot of these like forums on Facebook and other private groups. A lot of people were talking and sharing information with each other like, hey, I tried this is really working, you should try it. So they were going to their doctors and asking them about this stuff, and then the doctors felt like they kind of had to do some research, so they had some answers.
Yeah.
But I mean, all of the doctors we have worked with so far, like that was something really cool to me, that they were open to this new, more holistic, like out of the box, even though like we know it's not out of the box, right? It's like, oh, this is actually pretty basic to like what it means to be a human, especially from like a physiology standpoint. But in their minds, especially like when you think about it from like, okay, like a healthcare perspective, in Western culture, breathing has never really been anything that doctors or mainstream people have looked at as like a way to heal people or give them tools to heal some of these you know, like nervous system issues, a lot of autoimmune issues, mental health issues, right? And like those are the things that are really like the pandemic of like Western society right now. So it's cool. I feel like there is like this movement and kind of shift in perspective happening right now. And like you said, unfortunately it takes these like catastrophic events for people to kind of wake up to a lot about that stuff, but it's been like that throughout history, right? We know that's kind of like what causes things to change. So hopefully, again, we see that there's a lot of like good things happening throughout the pandemic, even though it's such a terrible time for most people. We saw the same thing with like 9/11 and kind of like the dot-com crash and like new technology, and so much innovation and technology has been happening over the past couple of years because of the pandemic. So I think in the future, you know, when we look at like 5-10 years from now, you'll be able to look back and see all this like crazy stuff that has happened and kind of point to, oh, a lot of these companies or technology or innovation grew in that time of chaos.
You know what? I'm laughing to myself when you said like the out of the box thinking, because one of my favorite analogies, I'm like, this is a closed system. It's not like this comes off, this comes off. Like, this is the box.
Yeah.
You don't need to get out of the box. Like, this is the box. This is the container that is the self, and the emotions, the physiology, the anatomy, the structures, they're all together and connected. And sometimes I use like the family tree analogy. I mean, they might be like a direct sibling, a parent, or a long standing like second cousin once removed, but it's all connected. So
Right.
that always makes me laugh. And if we're not laughing, we're gonna do other things. So the breath also helps when you're having conversations with people that might not be on the same page as you. And again, modeling patience and presence and calm and heart rate variability, and as well as regulating your nervous system. So we've gone over a ton of really, really juicy conversations, and I just have one last question for you.
Okay.
I like to end every single interview with the same question, and you can take this in an esoteric or an anatomical lens, but what does a deep breath mean to you?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Of course it is. I'm like, oh, this is it. This is it.
You know, to me, I feel like, and like obviously this is like a personal answer and question for everyone, but I think it's what allows me to really go inward and kind of connect the three things that I think about, right? Which is like the mind, the body, and the spirit. So I think like a deep breath, spending time. Most humans spend so much of their waking time on Earth, like in their heads.
Yeah.
And like once you're able to kind of get out of your head and get more in your body, it's crazy how many insights you'll have in your head, right? About like what, you know, all these answers that you're looking for in your head, you can actually find if you get out of there and start to connect more with your body.
Yeah.
And so like that deep breath is what I think about, like that allows me to kind of connect those three rings that are super important for me, like my mind, my body, and my spirit. And just like quiet everything down, you know? So it's like quiet all the noise down from your environment, your head, whatever thoughts and anxieties are going on. If you can just focus on your breath, you know, or your diaphragm, wherever you feel that breath when you breathe, you can kind of pick that focal point, and just start to, you know, focus on that area and take long, slow, deep breaths. That's what I think about, I guess. So I don't know if that's a good answer, but
I think it's a perfect answer. And with that kind of quieting things down, we'll wrap up, but tell everyone, how can they find you? How can they find Stasis? What are some ways that people can learn more about you and Stasis?
yeah. I'm on social media, so they can find me. I think like at Josh Duntz is my handle.
You think you don't know your hand?
Yeah. I'm not like super active on social media. I would say like LinkedIn is probably the best place that people can like find me, or they can email me directly. And I'm sure you can put this stuff in like the show notes probably too. So, and then if they want to find out more about Stasis, the current website is stasis.life, and then we're about to launch a new URL with this new platform that I was talking about. So they can just go to the old website now and then sign up for the newsletter, and we'll send them all the information about the new stuff. And then if they just like Google Stasis or breathing or something like that, we typically pop up on a lot of Google searches for that stuff.
Yeah.
And then we have some videos and stuff out on like YouTube they can search for as well.
And then one more plug, Josh is also a poet, and if you go to his website, you can read some really great poetry. So with that, Josh, thank you so much for taking the time to connect and to share a little bit about what you're doing, and appreciate all that you have to give.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate
All
it.
right. It's really windy here. All right, thanks so much.